Most people are taught that chickens are the only option for backyard livestock. But that's not how our ancestors built self-sufficient farms. For centuries, families across America relied on 7 other animals that required half the space, produced more protein per square foot, and survived conditions that would kill modern breeds. That knowledge wasn't lost because it stopped working. It disappeared when factory farming took over and convinced us we needed more land than we actually do. In this video, I'm uncovering 7 forgotten animals that still work today, especially if you value sustainable living, healthy food, or true independence on limited land. If you believe small-acre homesteading is possible, this channel is for you. I share forgotten animal systems like this every week, and subscribing means you won't miss the knowledge most people never learn. Welcome to the Animal Lost Vault. Let's unlock it. Animal number 1, Coturnix quail. This bird matters because it solves a quiet survival problem most homesteaders don't even realize they have: how to produce serious protein on almost no land. Our ancestors understood this. Modern factory farming trained us to think bigger is always better. The reason the Coturnix quail system worked wasn't technology or modern equipment. It worked because it matched real life: limited urban spaces, unpredictable food supplies, and families who couldn't afford large animals or extensive land. During World War II, American families raised quail in apartment balconies and basement corners when chicken feed became expensive and scarce. These birds didn't depend on pasture, complex coops, or constant supervision, and that's why they sustained entire households during the hardest economic times. Historically, all they needed was 4 square feet of floor space for 6 birds. No specialized equipment, no fancy incubators, just simple wire cages that could stack vertically, making them perfect for small yards or even garage corners. The practice was simple: feed grain scraps and kitchen vegetable waste twice daily, collect eggs every morning, and harvest excess males at 8 weeks. No maximizing production, no industrial scaling, just consistency. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: letting hens naturally brood their own eggs in quiet corners of the cage. That alone kept the flock regenerating without electricity or artificial intervention. Over time, this didn't just provide eggs and meat. It created stability for aging homesteaders and retirees who wanted sustainable protein without the physical demands of larger livestock. Each hen produced over 300 eggs per year, more than chickens, while taking up 1/10 of the space. The meat was lean, rich, and harvested every 2 months, giving families reliable nutrition during uncertain times. One detail most people miss is that Japanese farmers perfected quail farming during the 1100s for samurai estates, long before modern poultry science existed. You don't need that historical knowledge to start, but it explains why backyard operations often fail today. Modern hatcheries bred quail for maximum egg size, which destroyed their natural brooding instincts. That's why most beginners think incubators are required. They're not. Heritage strain Coturnix quail still hatch their own chicks if you give them quiet nesting spots and don't remove eggs daily. The system worked because it stayed simple, stayed natural, and required almost no land. This animal matters because it solves the problem of producing clean, healthy meat faster and cheaper than cattle, pigs, or chickens, while needing only 10 square feet per breeding pair. Our ancestors understood this during the Great Depression, when families couldn't afford feed for large animals or slaughter costs. Modern grocery systems trained us to forget that backyard meat production was once normal, not radical. The reason the rabbit system actually worked wasn't luck or desperation. It worked because it matched real survival conditions: no electricity, no veterinary access, and very limited budgets. Depression-era families across rural America kept rabbits in simple wooden hutches behind their homes, producing 30 to 50 pounds of lean meat per doe every year. The system didn't depend on pasture, grain shipments, or processing plants. It gave families true independence, and that's why entire neighborhoods relied on shared rabbit breeding stock during the 1930s. Historically, all they needed was a basic wooden hutch with wire mesh floors to let waste fall through. No fancy colony setups, no temperature-controlled barns. Just a 3-foot by 2-foot box per breeding pair, raised off the ground to prevent predators. The practice was simple: breed one doe 3 to 4 times yearly, wean kits at 4 weeks, and harvest them at 12 weeks when they reached 5 pounds. No complicated genetics, no growth hormones, just natural reproduction and grass hay with kitchen scraps. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: keeping does calm and well-fed after kindling so they wouldn't abandon or eat their litters. That natural maternal instinct, when respected, kept the system productive for decades. Over time, this didn't just provide meat. It created financial security for retirees and aging adults who needed protein they could afford on fixed incomes. Rabbit meat is leaner than chicken, higher in protein than beef, and easier to digest for people with heart concerns or dietary restrictions. The manure was 4 times richer in nitrogen than cow manure, turning struggling gardens into productive vegetable plots that fed families year-round. One detail most people miss is that medieval European monasteries operated massive rabbit warrens as protein reserves during Catholic fasting seasons when red meat was forbidden. You don't need that history to start, but it explains why rabbits were considered survival livestock, not pets. Modern breeders turned them into show animals, which made people forget their original purpose. Heritage meat breeds like New Zealand whites and Californians still convert feed to meat more efficiently than any other land animal, producing 1 pound of meat for every 4 pounds of feed. Compare that to cattle at 20 pounds of feed per pound of meat. The system worked because it stayed practical, stayed affordable, and gave families control over their food supply. This bird matters because it solves a problem most small farms don't realize they're wasting money on: buying expensive feed when the land already provides 70% of what these ducks need. Our ancestors in Central and South America understood this for centuries. Modern poultry systems trained us to think all birds need constant grain, which simply isn't true. The reason the Muscovy duck system actually worked wasn't luck or perfect conditions. It worked because it matched real homestead life. Hot summers, wet seasons, insect problems, and families who couldn't afford to buy commercial feed year-round. Colonial American farms raised Muscovies as both pest control and sustainable meat because these birds thrived in conditions that killed chickens. They didn't depend on grain during warm months, expensive coop heating, or constant human intervention, and that's why rural families relied on them when other poultry failed. Historically, all they needed was open pasture access during the day and a small 3-sided shelter for nighttime roosting. No electric fencing, no predator-proof fortresses, just basic protection from rain and wind. The practice was simple: release ducks at dawn to forage insects, grass, and slugs, collect eggs each morning before they hide nests, and let them naturally incubate clutches twice yearly. No artificial incubators, no forced molting, just seasonal reproduction. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: providing a small pond or water basin for daily bathing, which kept their natural oils healthy and pest resistance strong. That simple water access, combined with free-range foraging, kept flocks productive for 10 to 15 years without grain dependence. Over time, this didn't just provide meat and eggs. It created healthier gardens and pastures, because Muscovies eliminated slugs, snails, grasshoppers, and flies that destroyed vegetable crops and spread disease to other livestock. Their meat was lean, rich, and tasted more like grass-fed beef than poultry, making it valuable for family meals and holiday celebrations. Each hen produced 100 to 180 eggs annually, fewer than chickens, but larger and richer in healthy fats. One detail most people miss is that indigenous Caribbean communities raised Muscovies on half-acre plots for tribal feasts and protein storage during hurricane seasons. You don't need that history to succeed, but it explains why modern farms abandoned them. Industrial hatcheries couldn't mass-produce Muscovy ducklings as cheaply as chickens, because Muscovies take longer to mature and don't lay daily like hybrid layers. That economic pressure erased them from mainstream farming, not poor performance. Heritage Muscovy lines still forage aggressively, hatch their own eggs with 90% success rates, and produce flavorful meat without antibiotics or growth hormones. The system worked because it stayed natural, stayed independent, and turned pest problems into productive assets. Animal number 4, guinea fowl. This bird matters because it solves a survival problem most homesteaders face but rarely talk about: how to eliminate ticks, snakes, and rodents without toxic chemicals that harm pets, children, and garden soil. Our ancestors across Africa and Mediterranean Europe understood this for thousands of years. Modern pest control industries trained us to think we need sprays and traps, which only treat symptoms, not causes. The reason the guinea fowl system actually worked wasn't magic or perfect management. It worked because it matched real farm conditions, predator pressure, insect infestations, and families who needed livestock that defended themselves and the property naturally. Colonial American estates kept guineas as both alarm systems and tick control during the 1700s, when Lyme disease and snake bites killed livestock and children regularly. These birds didn't depend on human protection, expensive feed, or controlled environments. They patrolled pastures, alerted to danger, and survived conditions that destroyed chicken flocks. And that's why entire farming communities shared breeding stock and relied on guineas as the first line of property defense. Historically, all they needed was natural roosting trees and a minimal three-sided shelter for extreme weather. No fancy coops, no electric heat, just basic wind protection during winter storms. The practice was simple. Release guineas at dawn to patrol the property naturally, let them forage 90% of their diet from insects and seeds, and collect eggs seasonally if desired. No daily feeding schedules, no co-op lockdowns, just free-range independence. To maintain it, they focused on one thing, allowing flocks to establish their own roosting trees and patrol routes, which reinforced their territorial instincts and made them more effective guardians. That natural behavior, left undisturbed, kept farms safer and healthier for generations without human micromanagement. Over time, this didn't just provide pest control. It created disease-resistant environments where ticks couldn't establish populations, snakes avoided open areas, and rodents stayed away from stored grain and animal feed. Families with aging adults or health concerns benefited most because guinea fowl reduced exposure to pest-borne illnesses without requiring physical labor or chemical applications. The meat was lean, game-like, and nutritious, though most families valued them more for protection than food. One detail most people miss is that Roman estates during the empire kept guinea fowl as both luxury meat for wealthy families and working pest control for grain storage warehouses. You don't need ancient history to start, but it explains why modern farms stopped raising them. Industrial poultry operations couldn't confine guineas to battery cages like chickens, so they became economically impractical for factory systems. That business decision erased them from mainstream agriculture, not poor performance. Heritage guinea fowl still eliminate 90% of tick populations on properties where they free range, drastically reducing Lyme disease risk for families and pets. The system worked because it stayed simple, stayed natural, and turned pest problems into security assets that protected the entire homestead. If this kind of forgotten knowledge matters to you, give the video a like. It helps YouTube surface this to others who are looking for self-sufficient alternatives. And tell me in the comments, had you heard of any of these animals before, or is this completely new? I read every comment. This channel grows through shared knowledge, and your insights help other viewers make better decisions for their families and their land. Thanks for being part of this community. This bird matters because it solves a space problem that stops most urban and small-acre homesteaders before they start. How to produce harvestable meat in just 28 days using only vertical wall space, not precious ground area. Our ancestors across ancient Egypt, Persia, and medieval Europe understood this. Modern agriculture trained us to think meat production requires land, but that's only true if you ignore 3,000 years of rooftop pigeon lofts. The reason the meat pigeon system actually worked wasn't advanced breeding or lucky conditions. It worked because it matched real survival needs: crowded cities, expensive grain, and families who had no pasture but desperately needed protein. During the Middle Ages, French peasants raised pigeons in wall-mounted boxes and attic lofts when pigs and cattle were too expensive and required land they didn't own. These birds didn't depend on ground space, pasture access, or complicated feeding schedules. They produced tender squab meat faster than any land animal, giving families reliable nutrition year-round. And that's why entire European villages incorporated pigeon lofts into home construction as standard survival infrastructure. Historically, all they needed was multi-level wooden lofts or wall-mounted nest boxes, with each breeding pair requiring only 1 square foot of space. No pasture, no ground pens, just vertical boxes stacked 6 feet high along exterior walls or inside barn rafters. The practice was simple. Feed whole grain once daily in communal troughs, let breeding pairs raise 2 squab per month, and harvest squab at 4 weeks when they reached 1 pound. No butchering adult birds, no waiting months for maturity, just continuous monthly harvest cycles. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: keeping nest boxes clean and dry so pairs would re-nest immediately after harvest, which kept production flowing without gaps or seasonal slowdowns. That simple sanitation habit, done weekly, sustained flocks for decades without disease outbreaks or production crashes. Over time, this didn't just provide meat. It gave aging homesteaders and retirees a sustainable protein source that required minimal physical labor, no bending or heavy lifting, and very little daily time investment. Squab meat is tender, mild, and higher in protein than chicken, making it ideal for people with chewing difficulties or digestive sensitivities. Each breeding pair produced 6 to 8 squab annually, with only 40 pounds of grain, far less than rabbits or poultry per pound of meat harvested. One detail most people miss is that medieval French peasants relied completely on pigeon meat during winter months when pigs couldn't be slaughtered and chickens stopped laying. You don't need that historical context to start, but it explains why pigeon lofts were considered life-saving infrastructure, not hobbies. Modern poultry companies couldn't industrialize pigeons profitably because squab must be harvested individually at precise ages, which doesn't fit factory automation. That economic barrier erased them from American farming, not poor performance. Heritage meat pigeon breeds like King, French Mondaine, and Giant Runt still produce consistently self-regulate flock size through natural pair bonding and require almost no human intervention beyond daily grain and clean water. The system worked because it stayed vertical, stayed simple, and turned unused wall space into productive meat systems that fed families for centuries. This bird matters because it solves 3 homestead problems simultaneously: perimeter security, sustainable meat production, and weed control, all without requiring grain during growing season. Our ancestors across northern Europe and colonial America understood this. Modern agriculture trained us to think livestock needs constant feed and protection, but geese reversed that equation completely. The reason the goose system actually worked wasn't specialized breeding or perfect climates. It worked because it matched real farm life, cold winters, predator pressure, and families who needed livestock that defended the property while producing valuable food. Irish and Scottish tenant farmers during the 1800s relied on geese during famines because these birds survived on wild grasses and weeds when grain supplies disappeared and cattle died from starvation. Geese didn't depend on purchased feed, predator-proof housing, or daily human supervision. They bonded to property, attacked intruders naturally, and lived 20-plus years, giving families long-term security and sustainable production. And that's why entire rural communities valued breeding geese as highly as land ownership itself. Historically, all they needed was pasture access with a small pond or water basin for drinking and bathing. No elaborate shelters, no heated coops, just basic 3-sided windbreaks for extreme winter weather. The practice was simple: let geese graze on grass, clover, and garden weeds throughout spring, summer, and fall, supplement with minimal grain only during winter, and collect large eggs seasonally. No daily feeding schedules during warm months, no coop lockdowns, just natural grazing that turned lawn maintenance into food production. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: allowing bonded pairs to establish territory and nest undisturbed, which reinforced their protective instincts and made them more effective guardians against foxes, raccoons, and human trespassers. That natural territorial behavior, respected and encouraged, kept farms safer for generations without fencing or guard dogs. Over time, this didn't just provide security in meat. It created healthier pastures because geese eliminated broadleaf weeds and maintained grass height without mowing equipment or herbicides. Families with aging adults benefited enormously because geese required almost no daily labor, yet provided loud alerts when strangers approached, giving isolated homesteaders peace of mind and physical protection. The eggs were massive, with 1 goose egg equaling 3 chicken eggs in volume and richness, making them valuable for baking and family meals. The meat was traditional for holiday celebrations, providing one annual harvest that fed extended families without year-round care demands. One detail most people miss is that geese were standard security systems on Roman estates and medieval European farms long before guard dogs became popular. You don't need ancient knowledge to start, but it explains why modern farms abandoned them. Industrial agriculture couldn't confine geese to factory buildings because they need pasture to thrive, and their aggressive nature made them impossible to manage in crowded conditions. That incompatibility with factory systems erased them from mainstream farming, not poor performance. Heritage goose breeds like Emden, Toulouse, and Africans still live 25 years, bond permanently to properties, and produce healthy meat without antibiotics or hormones. The system worked because it stayed natural, stayed protective, and turned security needs into food production assets that served families for decades. This bird matters because it solves a problem most modern homesteaders don't realize exists: how to produce rare, sustainable holiday meat that reproduces naturally, forages aggressively, and requires almost no grain during warm months. Our ancestors across colonial America understood this for 3 centuries. Modern factory farming trained us to think turkeys are fragile, grain-dependent birds that can't survive without constant intervention, but that's only true for industrial breeds designed for confinement. The reason the heritage turkey system actually worked wasn't luck or ideal conditions. It worked because it matched real pioneer life, limited grain supplies, predator pressure, and families who needed livestock that defended themselves while producing valuable meat for celebrations and income. Colonial farms from the 1600s through the early 1900s kept heritage turkeys as seasonal meat without daily feeding, because these birds roosted in trees at night, hunted insects during the day, and reproduced naturally without artificial insemination. They didn't depend on expensive feed, heated barns, or veterinary care. They gave families true food independence and legacy breeding stock they could pass down through generations. And that's why entire farming communities maintained heritage turkey bloodlines as carefully as land deeds and heirloom seeds. Historically, all they needed was open wooded pasture with natural roosting trees and a basic 3-sided shelter for extreme weather and nesting hens. No confinement pens, no grain feeders. Just access to woodland edges where they foraged acorns, insects, seeds, and grass. The practice was simple. Let turkeys free-range year-round with minimal grain supplementation during winter, allow hens to nest naturally in hidden ground spots or hay bales, and harvest selectively in fall, keeping the best breeders for next season. No industrial hatcheries, no artificial incubation, just natural reproduction that sustained flocks for centuries. To maintain it, they focused on one thing: protecting nesting hens from predators during the vulnerable 28-day incubation period, which ensured successful hatches and kept breeding populations stable without purchased poults. That simple vigilance during nesting season kept family turkey flocks regenerating naturally without outside genetics or commercial involvement. Over time, this didn't just provide holiday meat. It created family legacies and income opportunities because heritage turkey meat became rare and valuable as factory farming erased traditional breeds. Aging homesteaders could sell breeding stock, fertile eggs, or dressed birds for premium prices to families seeking sustainable alternatives to store-bought turkey. The meat was leaner, darker, and more flavorful than industrial breeds, making it a true investment in both nutrition and financial security. One detail most people miss is that Native Americans domesticated wild turkeys over 2,000 years ago for sustainable meat and feather production, creating the bloodlines that sustained colonial survival. You don't need indigenous history to start, but it explains why modern turkeys can't reproduce naturally. Factory breeders selected for breast size so extreme that males physically cannot mate, requiring artificial insemination for all commercial production. That genetic manipulation erased natural turkey behavior and made people forget these birds once thrived independently. Heritage breeds like Bourbon Red, Narragansett, and Standard Bronze still reproduce naturally, roost in trees, and forage 70% of their diet during growing season. The system worked because it stayed natural, stayed independent, and gave families rare, sustainable meat they could control and profit from for generations. Here's something rarely talked about that explains why most animal systems fail today and why these 7 succeed when done correctly. Most backyard livestock operations collapse not because of the animals, but because humans tried to modernize what was meant to stay simple. We took systems that worked for centuries with minimal intervention and added electricity, expensive feed, complicated breeding programs, and infrastructure that costs thousands of dollars. Then we wonder why it feels overwhelming and unsustainable. The truth our ancestors understood is this: the more natural the system, the more resilient it becomes. Every animal I covered today thrived historically because they matched real conditions, limited resources, unpredictable seasons, and families who didn't have time for daily micromanagement. They worked because people respected natural behaviors instead of fighting them. Modern homesteading fails when we try to control everything, buy solutions to natural problems, and copy industrial models that only work with massive scale and capital investment. These 7 animals succeed on half an acre because they were designed by nature, not corporations. They forage, reproduce, and defend themselves when we step back and let them. That's the forgotten wisdom. Success comes from working with animals, not managing them into submission. The animals aren't the problem. Our approach is. When you choose livestock that naturally fits your space, climate, and available time, homesteading stops being exhausting and starts being sustainable. That's what this channel exists to teach. You don't need more land to become self-sufficient. You need the right knowledge and the courage to trust what worked before modern systems buried it. Pick one animal from today's video and research its basic needs for your specific climate and property. Start small, start simple. That's how forgotten systems come back to life, one homestead at a time. And if you want more hidden animal knowledge like this, subscribe to the Animal Lost Vault. This channel exists to preserve what actually worked for our ancestors before factory farming convinced us we needed their products to survive. Every week, I uncover another forgotten system that gives you back control, independence, and the ability to feed your family without depending on supply chains or corporations. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the knowledge most people will never learn. Thanks for opening the vault with me today. I'll see you in the next one where we'll uncover another piece of forgotten wisdom that still changes lives.